I am the senior analytics engineer at Wellthy. We are a tech-enabled caregiving concierge platform. I'm based out of Omaha, Nebraska, and I've been in the data space now for about 10 years in a variety of roles, but mainly as a data scientist. So that's going to be the experience and perspective I bring to this talk today, okay? But enough about me. Let's all try to commiserate about a set of problems I think we've all encountered in our work. How many of you have ever started work on a dashboard or a machine learning model, anything, and realized you're missing something from the data set, right? Yeah. You're missing a field, right? A derived feature, some kind of a field, a dimensional field for grouping. You've seen maybe a junior analyst struggle to pass requirements along, or even yourself, right? And maybe a stakeholder asks for something after you've delivered a data product, right? And you have to go back and do read work. Or just needing to revert PRs or closely follow up with another, right? I think we've all been there, okay? So I want to diagnose why that's happening, where it's happening, and discuss solutions that have been effective on our team at Wellthy that you can hopefully take back to your own teams. So first, where is the problem happening? Right there. The communications black hole where requirements go to die, right? So with the advent of this distinct role, separate and unique from the data scientists and analysts, there have been some growing pains. For some of you out there, this may have you worrying whether it's even worth hiring your first analytics engineer and pushing more of your modeling logic into the database layer. And I'm here to tell you that there have been massive gains to be had by doing that, right? All the engineering best practices you get, testability, traceability, version control, reproducibility, all worth it, right? The trade-off, however, is you have a lengthier development cycle for your models, requiring a lengthier review and promotion process. So the cost of not getting it right in that first pull request is now a lot higher, all right? So that gap has to be addressed. If, however, you're able to address that gap, we can achieve the coveted multiplier effect promised here, right? This is from a popular article from Locally Optimistic. I like to call it the Analytics Engineer Manifesto article, really. But it says that if you can achieve that multiplier effect, you can help your analysts and data scientists scale their efforts without getting bogged down in unmaintainable code, and allows you to run much leaner. So how do you realize that potential? It's necessary to address that gap. So let's talk about some of the whys of why this is happening. Based on my personal observations and anecdotes I've heard over the years from peers, both as a data scientist and as an engineer, I think the causes boil down to these two things. One is there's a lot less tinkering going on. The same person isn't doing the modeling and the analysis anymore. That was what I was used to as a data scientist, getting to build my own data sets along with the analysis. And then I think also some of us have the wrong mental model. How are you thinking about your data stack's build out, and in what order are decisions being made and the work being done, okay? So let's talk about each of these problems in turn and get into a little more detail. So this was data model requirements gathering for me for a long time. I was particularly an R Studio user, so it'd be some big, long string like that, right? But what's nice, though, is I got to develop that on the fly. I go to the analysis, realize I'm missing something, go back, add a field, add a join, maybe a CTE with an aggregated measure, something like that. The requirements gathering is all in my head and not a formalized process. And if you're a BI analyst, perhaps without an in-house modeler, you might be doing this. You might be in Tableau or Tableau Prep. You might be in Mode, Redash, pick your poison, right? And you're developing modeling logic in the BI layer. And in some ways, I think a lot of us probably miss these days, to be honest. You could fail fast. You could kick out visualizations reports really quickly. You had a lot of control. And I don't think people like relinquishing control that much. So as effective, though, and flexible as these approaches are for getting an accurate data model, there is a huge downside to this method, right? And I think most of you know what this is. You've now locked up critical business logic in the BI layer or your scripting tool, right? I mean, it's a string. Like, you can't track that. So you're also in danger of what's creating what's called highly localized models as well. That's that problem you get where you're creating like one query per answer. So this all comes with high maintenance costs, right? And this becomes that unmaintainable code-based problem I mentioned before. But by moving most of this into the database transformation layer, it becomes much easier to maintain and standardize. So this is obviously one of the big problems that DBT helps solve for, right? But all of this is kind of a moot point if we don't consider some big picture things first, okay? We see these diagrams everywhere. I think of them as like the data world's trading cards. It's my stack. It's full of sexy tools, and look, and I use high touch here and Fivetran over there. But I think this can trap us into a way of thinking that can be counterproductive to building the best models we can. And I think one of the issues that it forces us to think left to right, up and out from the raw data and eventually exposing it. I think it's partly because if you're a native English speaker or if you're use a reading system that reads left to right, we just naturally like to think that way. And we even think this way when it comes to data team roles, right? The data engineer lives off over there somewhere on the left, and they just like lob data over to the data scientist over here, like, here, analyze that. Just analyze that. So there's a place for these. I'm not saying you have to chuck them completely, but what I'm saying is be careful about it prioritizing, dictating the prioritization of your work, okay? This is not the model or the plan you should be using when you're building things out. So I'm saying we're in a different paradigm, so we need to be thinking and acting differently to set up our teams for success. So let's discuss solutions for these two issues in turn. So that mental model, okay? Let's rethink it a little bit. If you are right now thinking about your architecture strategy like one of the diagrams I showed previously, minimize that, kind of push it away a bit, okay? It shouldn't be unidirectional and linear. In fact, a lot of the time you need to be thinking backwards from stakeholders, forwards again, circularly, iteratively. From the stakeholders to the analytics to the data sources, right? A little more like this. Number one is the most important step. And that's why it's number one here. Being aligned with the business on what's important, what should be tracked, how the business is measuring and defining success, all these things. Without this step, you will not succeed as a data team. Everything else I tell you today will be a moot point. Business priorities should determine the order in which you're ingesting your sources, modeling concepts out, even which tools you add to the stack, okay? Because the tools are just that. They're just tools. They're a means to a strategic end. You can have the sexiest trading card of all, right, with the latest and greatest tools, but if you're not delivering timely and actionable information to those steering the ship, it's meaningless. So like I said, don't think so much about the tools in the stack. Think about the people, their roles, and how they're supposed to execute on strategy. This can help prevent the cultural gap that often opens up in organizations that don't think about their data holistically or strategically. I've seen it phrased as being locally effective but broadly ineffective, where you're perhaps able to, help a person or small teams here and there, and you think you're moving the needle in that way, but it's not doing anything for the larger organization. So being in line with the business means that you're in the room to hear and feel an organization's biggest pain points, all right? So it has to be a collaborative and iterative process. This also helps ensure that you're delivering the right model at the right time. This talk isn't called getting the data model accurate the first time, it's the right model. An accurate model is useless if it's delivered 6 months before or after it's needed to make a critical decision, or if it can't actually answer the question at all, right? So with that in mind, let's look at an example based off something we saw at Wellthy. So I've got a simple diagram here that shows queuing theory. We have a similar business problem at Wellthy. So say your business involved providing a service to external clients. Each member of the service team has a caseload that they're handling at any given time, and operations does not have a timely or actionable insight into their capacity, right? Let alone the ability to benchmark across teams and observe historical trends or track the size of that backlog right there. So you can forget about things like, are we staffed correctly? Do we need to hire more people? I'm not going to be able to forecast anything off of this. So business leaders have recognized that gap and have directed the data team to provide capacity metrics to service team management. So going back to our mental model, the business has communicated to the data team. This is the top priority, as is both a revenue and cost driver. It's not to go get Salesforce in the data warehouse. It's not to implement the latest and greatest reverse ETL tool. It's this. So you have discovery sessions with the primary users of this report. You should be asking what decisions the service team is regularly making, what keeps them up at night, right? Is it the size of that backlog? Are we staffed appropriately? Is our service team being used efficiently? So gather together those requirements and start listing them out, right? This is a simplified version of what I would pull out of a discovery session like that, but it kind of gets the point across. But the big thing is now, how do we ensure we build a data model that satisfies these requirements? Okay, and this goes back to that tinkering process I talked about earlier. We need to somehow recreate it. Get back into that mindset that you're in when you're able to do the data set build out and the analysis at the same time. Because with the engineers not doing the analysis and the analysts not having the data, how do you get those requirements passed along in a clear way to the modeling layer? And this is really the meat of what I want to talk about, because I think it's a lasting area of frustration as data roles evolve. Under the old paradigm, you could really get to know the data, right? You could anticipate needs, find pitfalls, test assumptions, explore the data, become one with the data, right? And this is going to be especially important to more junior members of your team, both analysts and engineers, because a junior analyst will have a really difficult time knowing what they need from a data set, and a more junior engineer will have little, if any, analytics experience to help anticipate what an analyst or stakeholder might need from a data set. So here is a suggested framework, and you're going to notice that mockups are going to be kind of the theme of the day. All right? Create a mock dashboard. Pair it with a mock data set, and then go put that in front of the stakeholders before you start any work. You'll be surprised by how much really good feedback you get from your end users when you put something tangible in front of them. Question some of you might have is, why not create the data set first? Don't be limited by your fake data. Create the ideal dashboard first, and then adjust from there. This is a case where going back to our mentor model, we need to work backwards. All right? So creating a mock dashboard, what does that look like? In this case that I'm going to show up here, in a tool like Figma or FigJam, if any of you are familiar with that, you're going to basically wireframe your dashboard. The advantage here in a tool like this is that it's collaborative, so the analysts can share it out with others, including stakeholders or other analysts for feedback. But by having something tangible to work with, you're already starting to notice some requirements jump out, okay? So if I just go to the end result there, something simple like those filters at the top there. Oh shoot, I know for sure I have to have those fields in my data set. Those bar graphs, I'm definitely going to have to be able to split this data out by team or case type. I need historical data to support that line graph. And on top of it, okay, it looks like they're asking for daily level records. So I know this needs to have a daily level of granularity. Now you create the data set that supports the dashboard. This is as simple as opening up a blank spreadsheet and just typing in fake numbers, okay? This doesn't need to be massive, row-wise, but just enough to test or support your dashboard's functionality. So if you have a breakout, have a few cases represented. If you have a line graph like we had before, do you have the right date granularity or formats to support it? If you have drill down functionality, should any records be aggregated or not? I don't know how many times we've gotten requests for something and we've pre-aggregated a measure in your data set, and it's just like, oh, can I break this out or drill into it and see what I can filter it by? And you're like, oh, crud, I can't do that. So I have to go back and fix that. This catches that requirement. And since there's historical data in here too, there are nuances to that, right? So at Wellthy, our historical models are different than, say, our generic fact and dim models, right? They have special considerations. For example, thinking about capacity over time, I'll need to include things like non-active or terminated employees in my data set. You might not realize you need to do that until later. That's one of those easy gotchas, huh? So ultimately, this is what the analytics engineer is going to aim to recreate at scale. And it really doesn't matter which tool you use, honestly. Here's some suggestions, but it's really just what gets you back into that mindset, okay? That tinkering mindset. It could be something as prosaic as pen and paper, right? Some of the best data viz gurus I know use pen and paper to great effect. And then to point 2 about getting stakeholder approval during the mockup stage. This is an actual example from one of our more recent mockups. I want to say in about the last 2 weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks. We had our entire client success team in here making comments, asking clarifying questions, proposing features, all of that. So let's say on our mockup, somebody asked to be able to drill into one of the metrics. That means we can't pre-aggregate that value. That's another requirement to pass on. So you continue to iterate on this until you have a list of clear requirements, and that defines done. So some things to keep in mind while you're doing these exercises. For the analyst or the data scientist, obviously filters, dates and the formats of those dates, aggregations. Another one is going to be calculated or derived fields. Right now, a lot of BI tools have derived fields locked into that layer, and we want to move those into the database layer as much as possible. So important to call those out. For the engineer, I have this one bolded because this is one of my favorite things to harp on with for analytics engineers, is the generalizability of your models, okay? There's a bit of a Goldilocks problem here where they need to be specific enough to actually answer the questions at hand, but also be somewhat multi-purpose, right? With an eye towards future needs too. So that often means for me like, oh, they might actually need that field in the future. They didn't ask for it, but I'm gonna put it in here just in case. Too specific gets you, however, back to that one query per answer problem from before. But I do think this is an area where former analysts at now engineers can really shine personally because they're able to anticipate those needs a bit better. And then scalability. Okay, that multiplier effect can only come into play when you're not creating tech debt in your modeling layer. So make sure you're following your team's standards and best practices. That includes your naming conventions, right, and how to handle historical models, et cetera. And then assumptions, testing data source assumptions. Does that field actually mean what we think it means? Sometimes no, it doesn't, so check those. And then the last one here is, it's an important one I want to call out too, is that don't overlook the constraints of your BI tool. So for example, at Wellthy, we use ThoughtSpot, and because of the natural language generation feature that they use to power self-service, they add a stricter than average constraint to our modeling. So using this communications framework for us has been particularly critical because getting it wrong is not just amount of tech debt in the database layer, but becomes tech debt in ThoughtSpot. Now, note for us, the trade-off has been that we do have increased business self-serve, and we have a lot of eyeballs now in the business who use ThoughtSpot on a daily and weekly basis. So the trade-off has been worth it there. All right, so once you're done, this is what gets passed to the analytics engineer: the mock data set, the mock dashboard, and the definition of done. And then it then allows me to do, I don't know, my own mockups. I love planning out my modeling before I even start. Again, mockups are kind of the theme of the day, right? And then I, as the analytics engineer, can then design and deploy the model with those detailed requirements. I know exactly what I have to build, and the analyst knows exactly what to test for when they do a PR review. Okay. So, whoops. I don't know where that came from. That is not part of the slide. Anyways, I don't know. No. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So what would have happened had we not done this exercise? That's not to say we would have missed all these things, but there's a good chance we would have missed several of these critical pieces. We're making sure we get all the key fields that we need. We know we've identified a key data nuance, that this is a historical model. We know what to and to not pre-aggregate. We identified the cardinality of the model that we need to build. And the most important one, that top one, is we receive strategic direction first. We know that the model is going to have immediate impact. Okay? So results at Wellthy for us. I will admit there is some upfront work here in mocking things up, but the payoff for us is there. And these are some examples of just some of the mockups that we do regularly at Wellthy. But our capacity models power our most used and most visible company metrics and dashboards. We have not had to modify or update these models since rolling them out earlier this year. They have scaled to accommodate evolving reporting needs, including a reorg, and an increasing number of self-service users. And we're able to continue pushing forward as a small team of 4 on new initiatives, rather than battling tech debt in our modeling layer. And the best thing of all, though, is our models and dashboards have had measurable impact. Our version of that capacity dashboard helped drive a 21% increase in our gross margin this year. So that's ultimately what this is all about, right? Making a measurable and meaningful impact. And that's ultimately what I want to do here today, is pass along some of this wisdom that we've picked up as our small and mighty data team of 4 over the last year and a half to hopefully help some of you out there be the most effective and impactful data team that you can be at your organization. Because I think all of us can agree that we all benefit when we all collectively succeed as data professionals. So that's it for me. Feel free to reach out and to discuss this even more. If you have any similar war stories, I would love to hear them, or any methods you use at your organization to solve for this problem. I tend to be a lurker on Slack, but don't worry, I'm out there if you need to find me. And continue the conversation on Slack. And thanks for coming. It was, packed house, so appreciate it. Thank you.